Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be breaking down the key spoilers from today for Kaldheim, today being January 12th. Now, I've been doing spoilers for every set for a little while now, and I am trying to experiment a little bit to see what you guys like the best. And so in today's video, I'm doing something a little bit different. So instead of talking about every single card that has come out, I am talking about all of the uncommons and above, and any commons that pique my interest. So I'm looking at every single common, and if there's one that I think is noteworthy, and I have something to say about, I'm gonna do it. But there are many times in the past where I've been like talking about a 3/3 vanilla, and I'm just like, yep, this is boring. And honestly, that wastes your time, it wastes my time, because you don't really need to know that a 3/3 for 3 in green is just meh, and is clearly there for limited. So unless something seems really powerful in limited, or I think has some potential, I'm not super gonna talk about it. I'm not gonna talk about it a lot. And so I figure I can kind of reduce the number of cards I'm talking about, which means I can talk about each one in more detail without feeling like I have to get on to the next one. So essentially, I'm talking about the cards that I think have something to be said about them. However, if you do want to see all of the cards, first off, let me know what you guys think about this new format. If you want to see all of the cards, I will put a link down below where you can check out all of them as well. But why don't we just jump right into this? Starting off, we have Kaldheim Unleashed. It's a 4-cost white sorcery, and it says create a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. So on its face, it's kind of just a 4/4 flying vigilance for 4. So kind of a, I believe that's a Sarah Angel, or does Sarah Angel cost 5? I don't remember. But it is a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. And then if you foretell this card, instead you create X of those tokens. And why that makes sense is that it is XX white. Now what's interesting is that technically this works kind of as a normal foretell card, in the fact that if you foretell it, and then pay 1 mana, you are paying like 1 less than the actual cost to get the same effect. But if you can pay up to 5 mana, it works pretty well. And what else works pretty well about it is the fact that since it's a foretell cost, you can kind of pay 2 of the mana on 1 turn and then have as much of the mana that you can, so that way you can pay as much into X as you want. So I think this one works functionally well as a foretell card, unlike some of the other sorceries, which I think just kind of have it shoehorned on. This one seems to really be thought out. It's interesting that you can just kind of normally foretell it to get your normal just 4/4 angel, except for 5 mana split over 2 turns, or you can also then foretell a bigger turn coming and kind of create a big swarm. So I think there's a lot of potential with this card, and it's a very good card in my opinion. Yep. Next, we have Pyre, Arcanist. It's a 5-cost blue creature giant wizard 2/5, and it says this spell costs 1 less to cast if you control a giant or wizard. So this is going to work well in a giant or a wizard deck. It's going to be mostly a good thing in limited, although obviously, you know, getting a creature for cheaper is never a bad thing, and the fact it actually has another ability. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for an instant or sorcery card with the same name as a card in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this one can be pretty good, and I think that it could actually see its way into like a jankier kind of deck. But I think this mostly is here for limited, although that's not exactly true, because you know, guaranteeing that you have multiple of one card is kind of hard to do. It's gonna work well maybe in a party deck where you have those party payoffs, and then you can go get multiple of them. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how or if this sees play, but it's kind of, they've been trying this a lot. There was like matchmaker pattern or something from some core set, I believe, or Throne of Eldraine, one of the two, where it's essentially like entered the battlefield and like tutored for other things that shared names. So it looks like they're trying to do similar things, this time with instants and sorceries, and it's kind of interesting. Next, we have Feed the Serpent. This one is a common. It's a 4-cost black instant, and it says exile target creature or planeswalker. Now, I think this is a very playable card. I don't think there'd be many people who, if you played this in your standard deck at FNM, would be like, why are you playing that card? Back in, I believe, Ixalan or Rivals of Ixalan, there was a card named Vraska's Contempt, which was a 4-cost, where 2 of it was black, instant, and it said exile target creature or planeswalker, you gain 2 life. So that card is, by the way, a clearly better version than this card. There's a couple differences. That card was a rare, this one is a common, and also, that card isn't in standard. The closest thing we have to this is Murderous Rider, where it's not actually exiling, but it is allowing you to destroy target creature or planeswalker, and then it can come down as a creature. So I still think that card is much better. Just on principle. But I wouldn't be surprised if this makes its way into a bunch of control decks, as it is a versatile effect that, you know, it isn't bad. Like, it is a common, but I think this is a common that could definitely see play. I knew very few people who played Vraska's Contempt for the life gain. Yes, it wasn't like something that people were like, ooh, I wish it didn't have life gain. It was obviously an upside, and it did help in those control matches where maybe you need to remove a creature and gain some life. So that definitely was an upside. But this, I feel like, could also function very well in other decks. And if we're looking at historic, it's just another piece of removal there that I think is pretty good. Next we have Egon, God of Death, and Throne of Death. So Egon, God of Death is a 3-cost black legendary creature god, 6/6 with Death Touch. So it's a 6/6 for 3 with Death Touch. But it says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Egon and draw a card. Now, I find something very interesting about this. We see a lot of these, well, not a lot, but a decent amount of these in black, where it's a cheaper spell that creates a big creature, but there's a downside. You have to discard a card at your upkeep. You have to do something. This one is a little bit more punishing. A lot of the time, they're like, do this, and if you can't do it, well, then too bad. Nothing happens. Like, you know, if it was like, discard a card. Yeah, you'd eventually run out of cards. But because of the nature of this one, it actually does sacrifice itself. Now, it does sacrifice itself, not exile itself. The big thing here is that it replaces itself, with normally these big creatures don't do. This one will literally just replace it. So you can put it on the battlefield, get some value. Now, it is not a May. You cannot choose to just sacrifice it. You have to keep exiling, which, if you look at the other side, is kind of, maybe not counterintuitive, but Throne of Death is a 1-cost black legendary artifact, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, and then you can pay 3 and tap to exile a creature card from your graveyard to draw a card. So it's kind of just a black removal way of doing, like, card draw. Not black removal, it's a black way of doing card draw, where you're kind of turning creatures into card draw. The thing is, I feel like the decks that use this are not going to want to use the exile effects, at least if we're looking outside of standard and historic. They are really going to care about that Throne of Death, saying at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. I think this has playability in older formats. It can exile a creature card from your graveyard to draw a card. That is definitely an option, and the 6/6 for 3 isn't awful, obviously. It's a pretty good effect. I just feel like a lot of the decks that are going to run this are ironically not going to want to exile stuff and are only going to care about that one ability. So I could be totally misreading this card, but I think that there are 2 very separate ways you could take this, and I think both are completely valid and interesting. So I definitely like this card. Next, we have Burning Rune Demon. It's a 6-cost black creature, demon berserker, 6/6 with flying. So a 6/6 for 6 with flying, not bad. And when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for exactly 2 cards not named Burning Rune Demon that have different names. If you do reveal them, an opponent chooses one that you put the chosen card into your hand and the other one into your graveyard. So, if I'm not mistaken, this is a reference to a demon that lets you tutor for anything, like Rune Scarred Demon or something. And there's another card that does something very similar. So it's kind of a fusion of the two. This is a pretty good effect. You're getting a 6/6 for 6, but you're also tutoring. Of course, you can't, you know, they have to be 2 things of different names. So you're going to get one of the 2 things, but you're going to get the worst thing out of the 2. So you kind of go tutor for the second best thing in your deck, and you get a 6/6. Like, it's not a bad card in any way, especially saying that you could flicker this and just get so much card draw and it's like selective card draw off of it. I think it definitely is a powerful card, but I just don't know how good it necessarily will be, just because of the high mana cost, and like, yeah, it replaces itself. But I think if you're not flickering it, you're not getting too much value out of it. But then again, for something like Commander, you don't always need to be running the most efficient card. If you need a tutor in a deck, this works fine. Next, we have Basaltravager. It's a 4-cost red creature giant wizard, so another giant wizard, 4/2, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So if you're running a giant deck, if you're running a wizard deck, or if you're running a shapeshifter deck, this does some interesting things. However, I do feel like this one is way more intended to be a limited card. I would, be very surprised to see people running this. It's a one-time effect on a creature, and that's all it does is deal damage. Now, it does do it to any target, so I guess it may actually be better than I'm thinking, just because it can take out a creature. When it ETBs, it's dealing 1 damage to an opponent. So maybe someone's wanting to play this, but I really don't see it. But I could totally be wrong. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Maybe you run this in a changeling deck, and this just deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of creatures you control. But I don't know. I don't really see it being played that way. Next, we have Dual Strike. It's a red instant, and it says, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this is kind of like dual cast. But this one you can only do for CMC 4 or less. However, it's also an instant, versus I believe the other one was a sorcery, so you can only do it on your turn. But what else is interesting is that you can foretell it, and this is one where it makes perfect sense to foretell it. You're paying the mana cost up front, so that way you only have to pay 1 red. And why is that so important? Well, you're copying something, so maybe you don't have the mana to cast the spell and copy it. Now, of course, the fact that it can only copy things with CMC 4 or less, it does kind of limit it in terms of that, usefulness, versus if you could cast anything and copy it, it would be pretty insane. The foretell would be even more useful. But yeah, I definitely like it. I like spell copying. I think it's an interesting thing, and I'm glad we're getting more cards of it. And this one doesn't necessarily just copy a spell. It copies your next spell, which I feel like very much fits the theme of foretelling that something's about to happen. Next, we have Crush the Weak. It's a 3-cost red sorcery. And Crush the Weak deals 2 damage to each creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. Yeah, this is pretty good. We had a version of this called Flame Sweep, except it was an instant and it didn't kill your creatures with flying. So you might say this is the worst card, but no, this card exiles things, which I think is pretty good. And the foretell ability definitely is an improvement. Because you may want to play cheaper. This is another one where I think the foretell makes a lot of sense. You'd want to play cheaper for this because then you can maybe rebuild your board. Everything gets destroyed, or most everything, and then you can kind of rebuild your board if you need to. I think we did need another cheaper red sweep, and so I think this is pretty good, and I like it. Next, we have Herald, King of Skemfar. It's a 3-cost black and green legendary creature, elf warrior, 3/2 with menace. And when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an elf, a warrior, or a Tyvar card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you can get the Planeswalker, you can get the warrior, or you can get an elf. Warriors generally aren't in black and green. Obviously, you can run this to go get that, but yeah, definitely an interesting effect. And in terms of like a commander, having just an ETB and then it does nothing else is kind of lame. Again, unless you're flickering it, these 2 colors really don't do that often. So I really don't see this being an amazing card. The fact that it can go get Tyvar is interesting, but I just don't see many people being excited to build this. Which is fine. Not all legendary creatures need to be commander viable. I just want to make that very clear. Next, we have Herald Unites the Elves. It's a 4-cost green and black enchantment saga, and it says 1 lore counter. You mill 3 cards. You may put an elf or Tyvar card from your graveyard onto the battlefield. Again, going on with the Tyvar thing. If we ever get more of him in the future, this card will get better. Also, just being able to put an elf from your graveyard to the battlefield, pretty good in a self-mill kind of elf deck. So if your deck's going for that, that is already a pretty good effect for 4. But then you can put a +1/+1 counter on each elf you control, which is also insane because you probably have a ton of them because, they're elves. And then whenever an elf you control attacks this turn, target creature and opponent control gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So you basically can split -X among any number of creatures where X is the number of elves attacking. So if you have more elves than they have creatures, like let's say everyone has a bunch of 1/1s, you can just massacre things. Or you can murder some big things. And so it's going to be a lot easier to swing knowing that you can just murder the things that are going to kill your things. So yeah, very, very, very good card. If you're running an elf deck, you're probably running this card if it's in those colors. The fact, you're getting 3 big effects. Honestly, I could see each of these being its own card, and the fact that you get all of them and in such a way that's interesting. You're going to put an elf down, then you're going to boost up that elf, and then that elf's now going to be ready for combat, so now it can trigger number 3. So they all kind of work really well together, so I think it's a pretty good card. Next, we have Weathered Runestone. It's a 2-cost artifact, and it says non-land permanent cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. So I believe this is a Grafdigger's Cage, and then it says players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. Actually, I think that one's a Grafdigger's Cage. So essentially, you can't put things from graveyards and libraries onto the battlefield, and you can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. And I've seen a lot of people compare this to Grafdigger's Cage, which does a very similar thing. I feel bad not knowing which one it is. It does one of these effects, but not the other. I think if I'm sideboarding this in, I want it to be as versatile as possible, and I know I'm paying 1 extra mana for this, but I definitely like the card. It stops a lot of things. Like, there have been a lot of times where it's like, oh, he's casting things from his graveyard, and he is putting things from his graveyard. So I think this does a nice job stopping that. It stops Uro, which is really nice. It stops things like Collected Company and Historic and other formats. So yeah, I definitely think this one will see play in sideboards. I don't think it'll be main decked very often unless you're maybe running an artifact deck, in which case you may put this in just because you care about the number of artifacts, and then you can have that artifact be useful. So yeah, I like the card. It is kind of stacksy in a way, but I feel like it's a very appropriate way. And that is it for this video. This one's a little bit shorter, again, because I didn't talk about every common, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you want me to go back to the old way? I'm completely fine doing that. I'm just curious what you guys think. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Again, let me know your feedback, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.